All right. Hello, beautiful people. Chad Putman coming to you. Special trip over to Fort Lauderdale today, this special Sunday morning. Actually, Sunday afternoon now. It's a little in the afternoon. Special thanks to the AV Club here in Fort Lauderdale for hosting us. So excited to be here. Again, my name is Chad Putman. I'm a social worker. I identify as a person in recovery, and we'll get into that a little bit more later on during this conversation today, but it is my absolute honor and privilege to be able to sit here today with Dr. David Fawcett. He is the author of Lust, Men, and Meth, a gay men's guide to sex and recovery, and his newer book that he just released recently, Sex Under the Influence. And so both of those have had an impact on me. I think they're great resources for the community at large. The treatment community, whatever your community might be, super resourceful for folks that are struggling with addiction or want to learn about all of that. But we'll let him talk more about that. And I'll talk a little bit more about, the impact that it's had on me too. But I just want to turn the mic over to David and give you a chance to introduce yourself, your background, and how you got into writing books like this.
Thanks, Chad.
Yeah.
Pleasure to be here and appreciate the invitation.
Yeah.
This is an important conversation that we need more of. So I'm also a person in recovery from alcohol as opposed to methamphetamine, which is the work I've done. But that really began this whole journey of mine into going back to school and getting an MSW. I'm also a social worker, and then really getting into addiction treatment. And so started out in the 80s in the cocaine epidemic here in Florida, and gradually started working with gay men, both in hospital settings and in outpatient settings, and opened a private practice in the 90s in this building where we're recording, and started to see a lot of gay clients. I was a sex therapist by then. They were coming here for sexual problems, quickly discovered they were methamphetamine issues that were driving the sexual issues, the sexual dysfunction. So I had to kind of quickly learn about methamphetamine stuff, which began this 30-year journey. There wasn't much out there, and that resulted in first Lust, Men, and Meth. I also would say, in addition to being in recovery, I'm a person living with HIV since the 80s, so that was an experience that really profoundly shaped not only my personal life, but my professional life. And HIV is a big, as you know, wrapped up in this methamphetamine epidemic in a very big way. So that's the core of the work I've done over the years, and keeps growing and changing as the epidemic does. But I'm happy to have been sort of service in this area.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today and to have this really important conversation. I really wanted to sit down with you too because we're both social workers, right? I've been in the field. I've done program development around drug and alcohol treatment facilities, outpatient methadone clinics. I got sober in my early 20s. I had 25 years sober. And then I also identify as a person that struggles with sex addiction. And my sex addiction led me to the world of crystal meth. And that was while I was actively working in the field of drug and alcohol addiction. And having been in recovery for a long period of time. And so I had no idea, honestly, up until about 3 years ago, maybe, how profound chemsex and or meth within the queer community, the MSM community, and not just meth, GHB, ecstasy, all of that. I mean, I knew about poppers and I knew that was a thing, but I wasn't so much aware of the prevalence of meth in the community. And when I fell into that, I was back in upstate New York doing my work in the field, and was busy on the apps and connecting and hooking up in an open relationship. And I met somebody who hopped in the back of my car and was like, they were like, "Oh, are you okay if I smoke this?" And I was like, "Oh my God, oh sure, yeah, whatever." And I thought he was vaping. I thought he was just like vaping and he was just like shy about it or something. I didn't really understand it at all. And so then shortly, we get into the car ride, and a little bit further down the road, he ends up sharing with me that it's Tina. And then I was like, I still don't really understand. What are you talking about? I don't know what this is. And eventually, long story short, within, probably a few weeks of coming in contact with this individual, thinking that as a person in recovery, a person in the field, that I would be able to help him get into the program, maybe go to treatment, maybe find some recovery. I ended up renting a hotel room, and then I was tasting it, and I was smoking it, and I was testing it out, and I was doing it, and I was like, okay, wow, all right. And immediately, wild things started happening for me. And so it's been my experience that when I've in active addiction, when I was in my early 20s, and then again, after 20 years sober, or 25 years sober, that episode of active drug use lasted for about 10 months for me. And it was really a roller coaster ride, and it was pretty intense. But like I said, I had no idea that it was having this much of an impact on the community. I didn't know it was so readily available, because once you know, now you know, right? And you get on the apps and you see it, and you start
this
crossing.
alternate universe that's all around us.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about how prevalent it is?
You bet. And I want to just go historical for a moment here. Back in the meth really came of age in the community, the gay community. It's been around, but in the mid-90s, and 95 particularly, you'll recall those were the days still with HIV. That was, you got diagnosed, you were told you had 2 years to live, and Fort Lauderdale, along with Key West, Palm Springs, other areas were towns where people came basically to live out their last days and die, right? So a lot of gay men would, the standard thing would be go on disability, give up your job, run up your credit cards, go live life, because you don't have much left. And in 95, the second class of HIV drugs, the protease inhibitors, came out. And it didn't, we know now we need 3 of classes. That was the second to be implemented. But it started to save lives, although it didn't totally fix the mortality rate, but people stopped dying. And also in 95, methamphetamine arrived and Viagra was released. And so you get this perfect storm of drugs, and now people have thrown away their lives, and now they're going to live and just partying and dancing, and it became part of that culture. And I think that really set root with meth in the gay community. And then, unfortunately, it's expanded way beyond that. It's like a cat with 9 lives, right? Because out of that, then the cartels introduced stronger, different kind of meth in the mid-2000s, and then the apps came out with Grindr and Scruff, and just each time it's like throwing gasoline on this fire. And now it's to the point where I know here in a small town where I'm a very gay town, but the police have indicated on any Friday or Saturday night, if they do a traffic stop, chances are 50% there'll be meth in the car.
Oh, wow.
So it's pervasive, and we're not unique, right? And it's not just in the States. It's all over Europe, Eastern Europe, Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa. It's like everywhere now. It's a huge worldwide epidemic.
Yeah. And like I said, once you've been exposed to it and you know what to look for, the signs and the ways that we communicate quietly about who has it and who doesn't have it, when folks are in the PNP, right, the party and play culture, sometimes it's easier to find. And so I've been to Costa Rica, I've been to Puerto Rico, different places, and it's there. You see the signs, you see the symbols, and the meth is there as well. So I don't know that there's any place probably around the world that really is exempt from the impacts.
Increasingly
not.
At
this point.
I also want to say, your story is kind of sadly typical in that it really exemplifies the power of crystal meth, right? The seductive power, because it does not just combine that drug high; it's the sexual piece as well, and that is so seductive for people. And I've seen a lot of guys who have never been addicted to anything who get caught up in that crystal meth path. And 25 years of sobriety, that's solid sobriety. And this drug got you. I can totally see how that could happen. I'm glad you found your way back.
Thank you. So as of March 21st, it was a year, all the way back, right, in recovery. So it's been 14 months now. We're recording this June 22nd. Today's June 22nd. And so I identify as, like I said, a person in recovery. I attend Crystal Meth Anonymous meetings. So having originally gotten sober by attending AA meetings, that was just the way that I did it. I attended meetings for 15 years. And then the last 10 of my 25 years, I didn't attend meetings at all, but I was very active in the queer community. I was doing a lot out there. I was working in the field. I had a boss that was like 30 years sober. So I felt like I was fine. And really, I think just the development of my sex addiction and the things that were going on with that, just the fact that I was sexually active and on the apps created an environment in which I could be exposed to meth, right? To chemsex, to party and play. And I think that when I talk with other folks that are on the apps, that are out there playing, that are doing their thing and sexually active, sexually positive, you don't know until all of a sudden you're in the situation. It's like, and somebody says, "Hey, you want to try this?" Like, it's no big deal. You know what I mean? And even the gentleman that introduced it to me, he was introduced to it because he met somebody on the apps, and they're like, "Hey, you want to try this?" And then boom, he's in it, right? And then it's like now he's passing it on to the next person, and then we're next one. And I really felt, when I first tried and started to step away from it, and I was working in the field, and I was talking to people that were treating drug addiction, right, from opiates to alcohol to cocaine, this is really kind of a silent killer in a way in the queer MSM community. Like, this is something that's happening. It's kind of like a second wave of the HIV/AIDS epidemic in a way, in that it's like it's having huge impact on people's lives, but like it's almost become part of our culture, and not many people are talking about it because it's kind of like an accepted part that it's like, well, as long as it doesn't cause problems for you, I guess it's okay, right? Like alcohol? Could you any thoughts on?
I think first, alcohol, of course, could cause problems in people's lives too, right? But yeah, I think the nature of it being so common and accepted is something that is a real problem, because it's an extremely dangerous drug. And meth is not the same as the old meth, right? This new cartel meth is called super meth or dirty meth, and it's causing a lot of psychiatric stuff, a lot of psychosis that in about 30% of the people never goes away. I mean, there's some really serious stuff going on. So I think, this is a real serious problem for the community in general. And I think part of it is what we're going to talk some today about, which is it gets wrapped up with sex, right? And what should sex look like in recovery or not, and how can we keep our kind of sexual freedom, if you will, and not get in trouble with meth. And so it gets all messy. And I think it's conversations that people often don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
Part of it is I think what makes meth a little bit exciting is there's a little bit of a taboo factor here. And that also is part of the appeal, but also part of the danger.
Yeah.
That could be very dangerous as well.
Yeah.
But I think, just in terms of how we approach it as a community is something we just need much more talking about, because I like what you said about kind of a second HIV wave. One of the things I was aware of very consciously when I started doing this work was, I myself had lost so many people to HIV, narrowly escaped with my life, and to see so many guys who survived HIV succumb to meth. This just a terrible irony of that. And I do believe it's equally dangerous to our community now. It's a huge wave of disaster, if you will. And just talk to anybody, any gay person, any queer person for that matter. They're going to know somebody who's crashed and burned with this drug or these drugs.
Yeah, when we open up the conversation, right, and we're willing to talk with our friends and family members within the queer community, the MSM community, the bi, the gay, straight community, transgender community, right? I don't think that there's anybody that isn't impacted or doesn't know somebody that has been impacted. And I think it's important to talk just a little bit about the impact that meth does have on somebody's life, right? So for me, and something that you talked about in your book, is sexual templates, and so where we go with sex once we start using meth, right? That conversation, that taboo topic that we don't want to talk about, right? So the first time I used meth, I was in a hotel room, and we used it. We were smoking it. I was never introduced to IV. I know people get into that, and that can be really powerful. And I've been told, don't ever jump off that cliff, right? If you haven't done it, don't ever do it. Yeah. Thank you for that guidance and advice. Unfortunately, that was never introduced to me. So it was always smoking. And so the first time I used it, I ended up basically on a bed with my head in the corner and a pillow with another pillow on the back of my head, basically just having this psychosis that all kinds of men were coming into the room and having penetrative anal sex with me. And that's what was happening, is that I was in that I was just basically, my body was being used for sex. And it wasn't until, after this stretch of 10 months of this repetitive behavior of going to the hotel rooms and smoking, and it was always about the sex piece, right? It was always about having sex with my partner, and then we would get on the apps and try and invite more people to come over and have sex with us, and then it was like always, it was always trying to find more and more and more, right? But then, it wasn't until I was able to step away from it and come back to it that I even realized that there was a psychosis going on, because I would get in such a state when I was high that I wanted to believe that was happening, right? So my brain was no longer functioning normally, and so even though it wasn't actually happening to me, it was like it enhanced the fantasy, right? Yeah. So not only am I in this room using this drug with this person and having sex with them, but there's like 4 guys lined up behind me and they're just all ready to have sex with me, because that kicked up the endorphins, it kicked up the pleasure. And can you talk a little bit about the impact that meth has on kind of our brain function?
Oh yeah, I think it's probably as a sex therapist, that's probably the single biggest impact, is like once people get sober, they often can't function sexually because their expectations, their brain wants that very intense dopamine-ridden state, right? And so it gets very difficult for people to kind of regain some kind of sexual functioning. But what happens there is that methamphetamine basically releases 13 times the amount of dopamine we get just walking around. An orgasm without drugs is 2 times that. So it's
2 times versus 13.
Versus 13.
Yeah.
And so, and because of that crazy disparity, a lot of people, I don't want to be as hyperbolic and say, well, if smoke it once, you're hooked, But I have seen, as I said, it capture a lot of people who were not really addictive at all, just that appeal. So that intensity, right, which is the intensity of that dopamine, drives us in such a way that very quickly we need more, just to the point you made. And that's because our bodies are always trying to find homeostasis, right? They're trying to find some balance, and so very quickly, what was exciting yesterday, the fantasy I had yesterday, isn't quite as exciting today. I need something more, and so we kind of are what we call arousal templates in sex therapy. We start getting attracted to other things, and it moves usually to darker things, more fetishy things, rougher sex, more taboo sex, into really, really dark fantasies. Yeah. And the fantasies, and I found oftentimes this is really a fantasy-driven experience, right? You can be having sex with a person, but oftentimes my clients will tell me, they're in a fantasy like you had in your head, and so the people talk about being connected to sex. Really, I don't see that when you're high. I think people are in their head, they're having sex with the body, but the body is almost like a prop for the fantasy that's rolling up here,
Right. 2 different worlds.
Yeah, 2 different worlds. It's an associative experience, or we're disconnected. And so I think, once that bright, shiny expectation is locked in our brain, this is when it comes to say, okay, this is what sex should be, that intensity. If we expect that to go on, indefinitely, we're setting ourselves up for a lot of problems.
Yeah, for sure. And the psychosis that comes along with it, the impotence, right? So just not being able to get hard during sex was very real for me. So at first, I think my it worked. My penis worked, the way I wanted it to, and then it just didn't anymore. You know what I mean? I wasn't able to be erect during sex, and so then you start inviting Viagra and other products in to try and compensate that, and then people have poppers around, and I was just listening to the appendix part of your second book that you did. That was speaking to the dangers of poppers and erectile dysfunction medication on top of meth, and possibly if you throw in some G in there too. Your body, talk about trying to find homeostasis, your body's just trying to survive the tidal wave of chemicals that are flooding through your body, and hopefully there's no heart attack, hopefully you don't stop breathing, hopefully your blood pressure doesn't stop. It's really wild.
I just, in terms of the risk too, just to mention gamma hydroxybutyrate. It's very close cousin of rohypnol, right? The date rape drug. And so we are seeing an epidemic of sexual assault in the community too. So you had that, you kind of talked about a very typical experience, I think, where you start out and you start inviting more people over, and suddenly there's a flow of people in and out, and those are often scenarios now where we're seeing people really be assaulted, and oftentimes it's live streamed, and it's really a pretty horrible experience going on right there. That is all. There was a study out of Cambridge in the UK that almost 1 out of 4 people who have ever had GHB have either experienced sexual assault themselves or know someone that has. So it's pretty common, which is frightening.
Yeah. And you know, from my own experience too, it becomes this gray line, and you talk about these dark templates, you know, that meth kind of blows the sand off in your book, you know, and it's there's a part of me that was inviting that experience, right? Like, what if this would happen, right? Like, what if somebody drugged me and then just a bunch of people had sex with me? Like there's a part of me that kind of like darker side of my shadow that was like, ooh, that might be hot, right? Because then, like, now my dopamine levels and all of that, right? And maybe just the trauma of it all is the kick, right? So just, you know, we get into these conversations with others that are using out there, like we just randomly start giving each other consent. You know, we just say like, oh, I give you consent, whatever you decide to do is fine. And then it's like, but you don't know until it's over, and then it's like, oh wait, you know, and you're not of sound mind and judgment, you know,
Absolutely.
when you're using these substances and you're making these consent, you know.
And a lot of times we give consent for the initial experience, right? But then it rolls forward, and now you're doing or getting something done to you that you did not give consent for, but you may be immobilized. You know, G kind of makes you powerless to do anything about that. And the psychosis of meth makes it even harder. And you're right, I think there's another, just to introduce the word in our conversation here, is trauma, right? There's a lot of trauma that's happened. A lot of us have trauma in our past, especially as gay or queer people, that it's not that unusual. And I think there's an element that certain aspects of the sexual behavior kind of echoes within us that resonates with some of that trauma. But in a kind of twisted way, it can get kind of exciting or hot to think about, and I think that's that taboo thing, breaking the norms.
Yeah, and I know that you share some examples in your book about different clients and people that you've worked with, and some of how like their taboos went to different places, and they're like, I never imagined that I would go there, you know. And I remember with this first partner that I had that introduced me to meth, was starting to introduce like physical violence to me, and I was like, okay, it could be a thing. All right, I'm into a little slapping, you know. But then when it was a punch across the side of the face, I was like, I don't know that I'm okay with that. You know what I mean? But then like when the drugs in the mix and the whole funky dynamics that you're in, you begin to make exceptions, and all of a sudden, you just find yourself in a really dangerous, scary place that you never imagined that you would get, and it's terrifying.
Yeah, including physical danger beyond the sexual stuff, right? I've had so many clients that have had guns pointed at them, or they're robbed or assaulted, or some bad stuff happens, right? You're putting yourself in a different world with people who aren't in their right minds, literally, and so it gets tricky.
Yeah,
so to speak.
Right. Sure. Yeah. So I, one of the tattoos that I got early on when I was first introduced to recovery is this. It's called Crisis Equals Opportunity, and so I want to use that to kind of transition to this conversation about recovery, right? So we've talked about the impact that it can come upon pretty much anybody, right? So if anybody was safeguarded, I mean, I feel like on some level, 25 years sober, I'm a social worker, I'm literally working in the field, running a program, like I should be okay, right? Like I should be fine. So, I mean, I feel like it can kind of happen to anybody. And even when I was out there, I met lawyers, I met property owners, I met people in their 70s, I met people in their 20s, people 40s, 30s, it didn't matter. And whatever the profession was, or no profession at all, we mixed and mingled in the hotel room and did our thing. Yeah, it goes across the spectrum. But this idea of crisis equals opportunity is that it blew up my life, right? So I had this whole life in upstate New York, and then at the end of this, I was like, I have to change everything. Like clearly something's not working, right? And so it led to a lot of different amazing experiences for me. And so as I thought about jumping into recovery this second time around, I wanted to take a different journey, right? And so I put in my resignation for my position in upstate New York at this job that I had. I told my husband, because I hadn't shared that yet in this video, but that I've been married for 20 years, or with my partner for 20 years. We've been married for 10. And so I had to put up my relationship on a pause, and I needed to get the hell out of upstate New York, you know? And so I knew that those three things had to happen, and I decided that I wanted to move someplace warm, someplace near water, and where there was a city. So I relocated to San Juan, Puerto Rico. So that was my self-imposed spiritual exit, and threw myself kind of into my own new recovery journey. That was kind of my escape to rehab, my second time around. And so I really had to kind of rediscover things. And so I want to talk about what recovery looks like. You've had so many different clients that you've worked with, and I imagine it's different for probably almost everybody. But if there's maybe some general practices, some general recommendations, suggestions that you make for folks that you've worked with and that are highlighted in the book, that if somebody has found themselves in this world of meth, right, this world of chemsex, how do they extract themselves? How do they do it?
Yeah. Tall order, right? You know, it's interesting your experience kind of getting out of the area. I think that's one thing that people very often need to do, because meth, it's like double the triggers and cravings of any other addiction. You have both the drug side and you have the sex side, and so the universe is full of sounds and people and sights and feelings and all the stuff that can lead to an urge to use. Sometimes it's overwhelming. People need to extricate themselves and go somewhere else. I always caution people though about a geographical cure. You're taking you with you to this new place, and they probably have meth there, as we talked about before. So you're lucky in that sense. But I think that just to kind of change the scenery a little bit, certainly to get out of that world, I don't think is something that you can do piecemeal. I think you have to really pull yourself out totally. You can't take little half steps when it comes to this chemsex world if you're in it. But I think to learn to manage triggers and feelings, to learn to this is maybe my therapist talking, but learning how to manage emotions, how to sit with discomfort, of what we call distress tolerance. You know, boredom probably being the biggest one. These are intensity addictions, and so boredom can really be a trigger because we start to feel stuff, and so managing those feelings is hugely important. The second thing I would say, just for gay men though, is oftentimes there's a second coming out, and what I mean by that is that I think certainly I and everybody I know, frankly, as gay people, we had a lot of issues in our adolescence, whether it's body dysmorphia or shyness or inhibition or whatever, and we just covered that over with substances typically, right? And so we kind of numbed it, but it didn't go away. We didn't resolve it. And so I have a lot of clients now in their 40s, 50s, 60s who get sober, and suddenly they're dealing with stuff like body dysmorphia or sexual shame or inhibition or the stuff that they thought they'd put to bed a long time ago. And they have to kind of deal with that and rediscover themselves. So it's not, the recovery thing is not about just dealing with the ravages of meth and the drugs, which is profound, but also kind of healing stuff. And things related to when I'm going with this intimacy here. And I think this distinction between seeking intensity when they say they're really seeking intimacy. Two very different things. Yeah. And so to try to parse that out and learn the difference. I think those are probably the two big things that I think I've thought. And then we'll talk about sex, but sex is, of course, what do you do with that? Because in many cases, and this is the wrong, big X wrong way, but I have a lot of clients who get sober because they have to. They get arrested or so they get some disease or something they want to stop. But instead of, they quit the drugs and they find their sex lives disappear, right? Because for the reason we talked about before, it's been so entangled with that the intensity, that 13 times dopamine experience, that without being at that high level of intensity, they don't have any attraction for it. And so they'll get in this period of like sexual anorexia, which is not good either, right? I'm afraid to have sex because every time I have sex I relapse. So I hold it together for 2 or 3 months, go back on the apps, get somebody to relapse, say that's not the way to do it, obviously. But is there a correct way to do it? There's no one perfect way for everybody. But I think one of the issues here, at some point, we have to reintegrate sex and all that goes with that.
Yeah.
Right. And then most of that is an inside job.
Yeah.
Long before we ever have any contact with another person, it's like getting our attitudes right about that.
Yeah, no, beautiful. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I just sharing on my own personal experience and getting to Puerto Rico, like when I think back, like if I was to have I did try actually, because I tried when I was still in upstate New York, I tried to do outpatient, like virtual outpatient, and have a counselor, and I was struggling getting back into 12-step meetings. I kind of was like, I don't know if I want to do that again. But I kept, like every weekend, I would find myself back in a hotel room doing the thing, you know what I mean? And it wasn't until I removed myself from upstate, ended up in Puerto Rico, where I had like less access to knowing who was doing it. Even though the apps could be on my phone and I could find it in a minute, I was really made a more concerted effort because I left everything behind, and so now I'm like trying to rebuild my future, right? So, for me, part of my early recovery, and I did, once I got down to Puerto Rico, a friend of mine in recovery was like, yeah, just go check out a meeting. Maybe you can do some, it'd be a good networking opportunity for you, right? So I didn't go because I wanted to get sober and do the 12-step thing. Yeah, I was like, let's do some networking, let's connect with other people in San Juan, Puerto Rico, it'll be fun. And so I did, and I fell back in, because there's so much love and support and compassion in the 12-step community. Yeah. And I always tell people that a lot of folks have issues with 12-step, and I'm not here to promote it, and I'm a full believer in multiple pathways to recovery. But what I find and what is most beneficial for me at a 12-step meeting is the human beings that I meet that have a shared experience, and that we can love and support each other. Period. Like that's what it's all about.
Which is what we're looking for anyway with chemsex, right?
Right. Oh,
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're not having sex in the 12-step meetings, hopefully, but
but
everything is that idea of connection for sure.
That intimacy that you talk
exactly.
about, right? That shared love, compassion, understanding for each other.
Exactly.
And so I started to find that in the 12-step meetings in San Juan, Puerto Rico. But then I was like, so what about my sex life? Because I was on the apps down there, and I was like, let me just, I don't know, what am I going to do,
Right.
So I decided that I was going to go explore Tantra. And so I booked a couple of retreats. I ended up going twice to Costa Rica and working with a daddy guru in Costa Rica and exploring what Tantra was. And to my surprise, it had to do with mantras, it had to do with breath work, it had to do with yoga and body asanas. It was all about connecting with me and myself, my spirit, my human existence. And then, wow, that feels amazing. And now I can connect with you, but you're connected to you.
And that's that healing work I was talking about. Beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah.
So, and that was my journey, and I know that, and I did, I made it 9 months in Puerto Rico, and then I went to a rave, and somebody had kava and kratom, and we were doing drinks, so I had a couple of the kava, and I had 3 of them, because one is never enough.
You must be an addict.
Maybe. And so I had 3 of them, and I was like, that's all right. And then I talked to my sponsor about it at the time. He's like, well, you relapsed. I'm like, so then I fired him because I was like, how dare you tell me that I relapsed, right? So I was really upset about that. And then I was on the apps, and I ended up going into Old San Juan, and I was hooking up with this dude, and he was smoking cannabis. And I was like, gosh, I haven't smoked cannabis in 20-something years. So I had him blow some cannabis into my mouth, and weed makes me super paranoid. Like, I hate cannabis. Some people, when I was listening to your book, some people say it helps enhance sex and things like that. But for me, I always get paranoid. It doesn't do anything for me. But yeah, I had that hit. It freaked me out. I ended up home, and it wasn't the high I wanted.
Right.
So the exposure to the kava, the kratom, the cannabis, and I was like, And then I saw somebody on the app, and they were using meth. And then we video chatted, and I saw him literally blow the smoke out of his mouth. And I was like, what's your address? I need to come over. So after 9 months of not using, right before I left Puerto Rico, I was there, and then I was in his room smoking meth, and then I was right back into the psychosis. There's at least 5 other people in this room, right? There's got to be. But there wasn't. And he was like, are you okay? Are you all right? And I kept saying, yeah, I'm fine, But it wasn't, and I was right back into that psychosis, and it really freaked me out.
Yeah.
It's powerful, powerful substance.
Yeah. And just the seductive nature of it, as you just indicated, I think it just really is, even after a long period of sobriety, I think we're not really out of the woods ever, because those triggers are so strong. I've had clients who are sober and doing well for like a year, and they get a text message from somebody that they forgot to block, some using buddy or a dealer. It's like, boom, it comes alive in their head again. Just that one text message can set it all off.
Yeah.
So it's something you got to be vigilant about all the time.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like, the friends that I'm in recovery with now, like one of the most challenging things for folks is the uncoupling of the chemsex piece,
Yeah.
right? So how do I get a healthy sex life, right? Whatever healthy is, right? And still be a person that's in recovery without falling back into that. And I have friends that, it's the pornography that they watch, and then the porn takes them back to their, chosen person and place and doing the thing all over again. Or it's a hookup and they're just like, kind of like nonchalantly like, oh, I didn't know. I was sharing with you before we did the broadcast that I was recently exposed to somebody who was using meth around me, even though I haven't used in 14 months. And I didn't know that was going to happen when I went to that situation, but it was there and it was being used. And the fact that I got out without using is amazing.
Right.
Right. But this dance that we get into, trying to find a healthy sexuality, a healthy sex life, without falling back into the trappings of meth and chemsex is really, really challenging.
Right. And I think the journey you have had with the Tantra and that kind of rediscovery, I think there's many different ways to do it, but I think that's the progression, is to do the inside work here, and then, translate that to how we relate to other people sexually. The other thing too, I think I used to think it was just a lot of really just queer folks came in and all of us in our community, but I think it's across the board. I've worked with straight men for the last 5 years who have the same issues. I think it's this lack of intimacy skills. And I think people that get involved with these kind of intensity addictions, sex, porn, chemsex, really don't know how to do intimacy. They confuse it with intensity. And so much so, the last treatment center I worked at, I actually developed this workshop on intimacy skills, how to be vulnerable, learning how to trust. And by the way, all that makes sense given most of our backgrounds with trauma and not having people necessarily we could trust, where maybe being vulnerable was dangerous for us if we really should. So, I'm a firm believer, even after all these years as a therapist, that everything I see makes sense given that person's life, But that doesn't mean we have to stay there the rest of our life. We can learn how to change. And get that the recovery skills.
Right. I would say that I'm so as a social worker, staying in the field now, working at a detox in the Tampa St. Pete area. So still working in the field, exposure to it, coming in contact with people that are coming in from alcohol, opiate detox, benzos. Meth is often very much part of the picture, and I will honestly share with you, we don't talk about sex. You know what I mean? And part, even despite, my background and my history and my, my own experience, the culture doesn't necessarily give us permission to have that conversation. Do you know what I mean? And so you are this beautiful, rare bird, right, in this community and the work that you've done. And that's just why I feel so honored and grateful to be able to sit with you, to have this conversation, to have listened to your books on Audible, both of your books, because what you share in that is a lifeline. It's a life raft for people who are trying to figure it out, because even when we show up in treatment centers, even when we show up at detoxes and rehabs or therapist's office, they don't really know what to say or what's going on. They don't know how to help us.
Right. I think one of the great tragedies is that a lot of people that go to treatment in regular treatment centers are told, well, just get clean and sober and the sex will take care of itself. And of course, you and I know the sex is so entangled with that, of course it can't take care of itself. So those conversations are important, and I hope more traditional substance use treatment centers start broadening. But that takes a lot of training. People are uncomfortable talking with therapists.
Therapists
staff,
themselves.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a sex therapist. I had a lot of training on how to talk about it. So I understand not everybody has that specialized training. But it's a real, we're not doing our clients any good by not talking about it.
And it's also why I wanted to have this conversation with you too, right? So we can put more material out there into the world, that it's okay to have this conversation, right? That people, that we're human beings, and that we are going to experience things that are going to blow up our life, or they're going to shift our life in one direction or another,
Sure.
Unexpected or expected. You never know what that is, and that's been my experience. I mean, you are also a person in recovery. You know, it's not like when I graduated from high school, I wasn't like, oh, I want to be in rehab in 2 years, right? That wasn't the goal, but life happens.
Right.
And so then
Right.
what do we do, right? And you know, this journey and this conversation about sex, I think, is so important, you know, and especially in the world of recovery and what that looks like, because I think so many people are trying to figure it out, and so many people don't, quote unquote, have the answer. But you know, what I tell folks in the treatment world where I work, and in conversations that I have with my friends in recovery, is that you just gotta stumble, right? I don't know that there is a perfect path, right? You just have to, you know, try to get outside your comfort zone, try and do something different, and try and heal and grow, and have some support people that can help you be accountable. You know, one of the things that I was listening to at the end of your second book is this idea of having an accountability ally or coach or friend or somebody that is there to kind of help
So
guide
important.
and support you in some way, because when left to our own devices, we can really kind of go
yeah.
left quickly.
Oh, yeah. I mean, our heads will guide us. My first sponsor in AA once said, never go into your head alone, David. It's a very dangerous neighborhood you don't want to be in, right? And I think we need to have that accountability piece always,
Yeah.
even with a lot of years of sobriety under our belts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually my Tantra mentor that I met in Costa Rica, I mentioned earlier, you know, one of his mantras was always get out of your head and into your heart,
Yeah.
right? So this idea that we have these incredible bodies, right? It might not be the perfect body that we want, it may not have all the parts and pieces that we want to be just the way that we want them to be, but part of my recovery journey now is really trying to spend less time up here, right? Less time in my brain and my ego trying to figure it all out, and to get into breath work, get into meditation, get into intimate practices with people that aren't just about, you know, the oral sex and the anal sex. You know what I mean? It's not just about the hookup. It's about making that connection
Right.
and the intimacy and building that and
Right.
seeing what that looks like.
Yeah. Which is terrifying for most people. But it's what a reward, right? If you can actually make that connection with your heart and someone else's heart.
Oh my gosh, the energy. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
had an opportunity to go back to Costa Rica to Jungle Neighborhood, and I worked with another sacred intimate mentor, which is the work that I'm trying to get into now, is around sacred intimacy. And alls we did, we did 24 hours of meditation, like literally just in our bodies. And it was just about recognizing the energy in your body and your connectedness to Gaia, to Mother Earth and the universe. And that was profound for me. I've never, in any of the recovery experiences I've ever had, I've never spent that much time meditating.
Yeah.
And just to feel what it feels like to be in my body without any chemicals is just, it's profound, you know, and breath work alone has been
Breath
huge.
work is really transformative.
Yeah.
Has been for me too.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time
Fast.
here. Yeah. So I want to thank you for taking the time to meet with me today, for all of your contributions that you've made to the community at large around chemsex addiction and recovery. I want to give you, just a few more minutes. If there's anything else that you feel that's really important to share, if you can maybe highlight the title of your books again, and maybe how people can reach out to you or learn more about the work that you've done, and how they can find the recovery resources you've created with love.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chad. So the two books, Lust, Men, and Meth, A Gay Men's Guide to Sex and Recovery, is the one that really focusing on chemsex and the LGBTQ community. And then Sex Under the Influence is 9 years later, so I've learned a lot. About half the book is tools and skills, which I think is really important. But it also looks at this from not just the gay community, but everybody, kind of a human thing. My website is david-fawcett.com, and people can reach me directly through that. And I think just in terms of final takeaway stuff, I think just it's a matter of healing and learning to love ourselves. I think so much of this is, especially the power of drugs, but any addiction, is to really disconnect from those parts of ourselves we don't like and are afraid of. And I think just to really find people that can often love us and support us before we can do that for ourselves. That's the beauty of 12-step program. And I agree with you, there's no one path. That's one path. There are many. But we need people that can carry us and help us until we can stand and walk and do that for other people, right? It's a community.
Yeah.
We need healing as a community as well. And that's where the heart is, actually.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And to all of you out there for taking the time to watch this podcast video today, I just want to say thank you. If you are struggling, or if you know somebody that's struggling with chemsex, meth addiction, whatever that may be, feel free to have them reach out to me. You can find my website. It's makeyourItHappen.com. You can find me on Instagram at Chad Putman 75. You can reach out to me. I'll make sure I post my email and my cell number in this video so that you can reach out to me if you're struggling at all. But as I had shared, I'm a person in recovery. Recovery is possible. Recovery is possible. And there's a lot of really incredible resources that are out there. And I always say that, if you have a community where there's a lot of active use happening, right? Alcohol, whatever it is, whatever is out there in the community, there's probably also a really great recovery community.
Exactly right.
And so I'm very fortunate in the St. Petersburg area to have an incredible recovery community. Shout out to my crew. Love you all so much and so grateful for all the love and support that I've gotten. And they're actually the ones that turned me on to you quite a while ago. So that's how I got connected to you. So with that, we are going to say goodbye. Much love, support. Take care of yourself. And again, feel free to reach out anytime. Peace. Bye.
Yay.